2023 will go down in history as the year we triumphed over COVID-19.
Well, we've reached it. Possibly the most dreaded Futurama of all time, the COVID episode. I've been a Futurama fan for most of my life, and I've never seen the kind of nervous anticipation from fans that has led up to this episode. Which does make sense. Some of the worst received episodes of the Comedy Central era were very topical, and coming back after 10 years with a COVID parody sounds like the exact type of topicality that would concern fans. Myself included, but was the concern warranted? Were they able to give enough of a future spin on the pandemic and lockdown to make it an enjoyable watch? Let's take a look at Futurama's latest, Rage Against the Vaccine, which, I have to admit, despite topicality concerns, that's a top-tier title. And also, if you want more Futurama analysis outside of this breakdown, I've got two recommendations for you. Make sure to check out my podcast, Cartoons That Curse. Toonerific Tariq and I have covered the entire series, including the newest episodes, and we'll be covering the rest of this season weekly, episode by episode. And last week, Tariq dropped what is easily one of my favorite Futurama videos I've ever seen about the classic episode Alila of Her Own. I highly recommend watching that right after this video.
Subscribe.
So obviously Futurama is no stranger to parodying modern day events, but it does seem that the longer the show has gone on, the more on the nose they've gotten with some of their parodies. Sometimes these things end up aging fine, and sometimes they end up really dating the episode. I think the example most people look to is Attack of the Killer App in the early Comedy Central era. There are multiple things that are topical about this episode for the time, some of which aged just fine, and some are just barely even comprehensible as jokes anymore. The entire iPhone storyline in Attack of the Killer App has actually aged fine. People geeking out about new technology has proven to be a pretty timeless phenomenon. However, specific jokes like Leela's Susan Boyle just age the show horrendously, and were not even particularly funny to begin with. So where does an episode like Rage Against the Vaccine fall on this spectrum? Well, like Attack of the Killer App, it has a little of both sides. I don't particularly think the future dealing with a pandemic is something that should be off limits. That's not a concept unique to our time. In fact, episodes like Cold Warriors already flirted with this type of storyline previously. However, a lot of the jokes in this one are so specific to our experiences dealing with COVID and lockdown. It's hard to see them aging particularly well. That isn't to say it's all bad. I did get some good laughs in this episode, and they do a decent job futurizing their version of COVID and molding it around the lore and world building. But a lot of the topical bits stick out like a sore thumb. I did enjoy their take on COVID, which is dubbed Explovid and is basically a rage virus, hence the title Rage Against the Vaccine.
Symptoms include blinding, uncontrollable anger, as well as a mild cough, which I don't have. I'm fine.
I think this is a fun way to make the virus itself more comedic and, avoid focusing on all the death. And making Leela basically patient zero was fun. We've had stories previously, like in Bender's Game, about her bottled up rage, and I think Angry Leela is generally pretty funny. Plus, it led to this absolutely top tier, perfectly fitting callback.
Quarantine her in the Angry Dome!
No good son of a...
So yeah, there is some really fun stuff in here. But again, some of the more specific commentary on lockdown life felt pretty tiresome for me. The Explovid tests were a little on the nose, or should I say in the nose. I did not love seeing those cotton swabs jammed that far, borderline body horror for me. And everyone using Gloom, the obvious Zoom parallel to try and work from home, felt like the most direct they could have been. What frustrates me about this one is that these jokes feel like they could have been in any sitcom in modern times doing lockdown humor. While I do appreciate how uniquely awful each crew member's camera angle is here, there's almost nothing future about this. It feels like they could have come up with some kind of newer future technology as a work from home fix. Holograms, surrogate robot bodies, stuff we've seen shades of before in Futurama, future work from home solutions that bring about their own future problems, not just showcasing the exact issues we faced in the 2020s dealing with Zoom. This is why I think the iPhone in Attack of the Killer App ages pretty well, because it was a future technology, it wasn't just a smartphone. Visually, I did enjoy some of the mask humor, with every single character wearing the masks differently, but again, so on the nose, or off the nose, depending on who's wearing them. Would we really expect them to still be using these type of cloth masks in 3023? There's really no available future masking technology at this point. I just think there are adjustments here that could have made the episode feel set more in the future. They maybe would have had to work a bit harder to find the comedic parallels, but I really think Futurama is the show that could have nailed those types of gags. While some of these pandemic-specific topics were a bit rough for me, there was one aspect of the episode that I unabashedly loved.
Irrational rage, spread through saliva and spit, constant angry moaning, It's all the classic symptoms of zombieism.
So yeah, I love this gag, that there is of course only one way to stop the virus from spreading and halt the pandemic.
The cure is always the same. Voodoo.
Futurama being such a fiercely scientific show and then opting to create a solution to its real-world COVID parallel using spiritual magic is so funny to me. And though there are some character aspects to this subplot that rub me the wrong way, I do think it's generally the funniest part of the episode. And it was nice to get a bit more of La Barbara in this story.
Zombieism killed my father, then brought him back to life.
But I think if I had any structural criticism of the episode, it's that it has a lot of disparate stories and feels a bit all over the place. It wasn't necessarily that I disliked them all. I liked some more than others, but the episode feels a tad chaotic in its presentation. I loved subplots like Fry missing Leela and trying his best to cater to her while she's sick and quarantined in the Angry Dome.
You'll get sick and probably beat up.
I don't care. I can't stand being apart any longer. I'm coming in.
This was a small part of the episode, but it's just another example of how the show can create quality conflict within Fry and Leela's relationship, and not because of its previously wishy-washy nature. Also, I really laughed at the screen that they used to see into the Angry Dome is called Mad TV. That's very stupid, and I like it a lot. The story was once again very on the nose with its vaccine commentary, whether it's commentary on the multiple companies creating them, people's skepticism of the vaccines, social media reactions to them. It was pretty much all right there, which I did not love. However, I did love that they brought in Wernstrom with the rival vaccine to Farnsworth's. Pretty much a perfect way to implement their antagonism towards each other within the story. Really reminiscent of classic episodes like A Big Piece of Garbage, or even the Dimondium-Dimondillium rivalry from The Beast with a Billion Backs. It was also funny to see Dr. Banjo make his third appearance as a vaccine skepticist. Pretty much the perfect role for him. Banjo first appeared as an evolution denier in A Clockwork Origin, and made another appearance running a zoo on an ape planet in Fry and Leela's Big Fling. Dr. Banjo being more anti-science gives him a different flavor of rivalry to Farnsworth, as opposed to Wernstrom, who is also a scientist, and it was cool to see both of those rivalries play out simultaneously. I think I half appreciated how they used the Omicronians here. The whole spreading misinformation about the virus over social media felt a tad uninspired, but I did love that they were the reason for the Omicron variant of Explovid. I know that might be the kind of on-the-nose joke that I've been taking issue with, but using the Omicronians for the Omicron variant is just very funny to me. Good wordplay. But I'm sure you can see how there is just so much going on with the Explovid storyline here. I know they're trying to hit all of the pandemic beats, but it all being condensed into a single Futurama episode makes it again feel a bit chaotic. And while the Hermes subplot in the other half of the episode stayed mostly focused, it felt very fetch questy, with Hermes traveling all over New Orleans trying to find this voodoo solution, which added a bit to the chaotic feeling of the episode. But overall, the journey was probably my favorite part. I even appreciated just seeing Grand Cylindrical Station, which is such a cool idea and design. Hermes taking this kind of mass transit was really great world building for Futurama. We rarely see these aspects of Earth since our characters mostly just travel in the ship, but exploring how other people have to travel further around Earth was sort of a long time coming. I'm surprised we didn't get more of this before, and the fact that it's a tube-based train system is the exact type of retro future tech I want to see out of Futurama. It was also cool to see other areas of Earth. Futurama has such endless opportunity to travel around the entire universe that it sometimes feels like we don't actually see all that much of future Earth itself. We see a ton of New York, we've been to Los Angeles and Hollywood a couple times, they visited the Vatican in that Da Vinci episode, but I can't really think of all that many other examples. So visiting New Orleans was welcomed for me, and I really enjoyed the designs and backgrounds here, and the graveyard in particular had a design I really appreciated. New Orleans is famously below sea level, and so their cemeteries cannot actually bury bodies in the ground. It's a biohazard, so they did a cool job with these mausoleums and above ground graves. Also, did y'all notice the alienese on this one? Translates to human jerky, though it actually looks like the future New Orleans has sunk even further below sea level because these force field levees are massive, and force field levees are a pretty cool future concept. I enjoyed this. Speaking of force, did anyone else feel like Umbriel's cameo here was a tad forced? I don't know, seems like they could have found a better reason for her to appear other than just we're looking at the ocean. No, I didn't hate seeing her again. I think I mostly enjoyed the Bone Bot though. He was a cool design, and though he was just sort of a vehicle to get Hermes to the final voodoo location, the performance in particular was really fun, and how can you not love this final send-off for a character?
Bon voyage!
So here's where my personal taste prevented me from really loving the solution to this episode. This is an aspect of how Futurama uses Hermes that we've talked about a lot on my podcast. The big reveal here is that the voodoo man Hermes is looking for is of course Barbados Slim, which I like that on paper just fine. Barbados is a hilarious character and they have this big ongoing rivalry, so that's a fun reveal. And I even love the reveal that the person who is actually best at voodoo is La Barbara herself, bringing her back in for the solution. That's a great idea, but I have to say I'm getting a bit tired of the whole La Barbara cheating on Hermes with Barbados shtick, especially with how far they take it in this episode.
Afraid she might be too sexually attracted to you to think straight? Well, you're mostly right.
I don't know. Personally, after the Hermes La Barbara Barbados subplot in Bender's Big Score, it felt like these gags had run their course. And after having great Hermes family-focused stories like the $6 Million Mon, or even the quick glimpse we have of them at Xmas in last week's episode, I was disappointed that they sort of regressed their relationship back this far. I think the Barbados La Barbara history adding drama to this episode resolution is a great idea. That's a fun way to mess with Hermes' insecurities, and there are tons of ways to make their history get in Hermes' head, but everything is just so overt that it kind of bums me out. Them both having keys to each other's houses, the non-stop flirtations in front of Hermes, I don't know, it all felt like a lot to me. I think I could have even forgiven the kissing sequence because in story, that is a funny way to test out if Hermes is still getting angry, re explovid. But I don't know. I think Barbados is a funny enough character that we don't need to throw Hermes under the bus all these years later. When La Barbara was introduced in A Flight to Remember, their relationship felt so sweet and genuine, but once they introduced Barbados Slim, the whole infidelity thing became such a major focus of their family dynamic. It's a bit of a Flanderization and it's not my favorite, but the end of the episode was still pretty funny with everyone getting voodoo shots. I particularly loved the subversion of the old adage from Hermes here.
Any sufficiently advanced magic is indistinguishable from science.
So overall, this episode definitely had a lot of the issues I anticipated from a more topical COVID episode. It maybe handled a couple things better than I thought it would with how they futurized their pandemic and lockdown commentaries, but they really could have done so much more. And while I enjoyed some of the voodoo subplot with Hermes, it also managed to make character decisions that I truly and genuinely hate, which was not what I expected to be my big issue with a COVID episode. This one is pretty easily my least favorite of the season so far. All things considered though, this one did at least have some good gags. I loved the rotating newspaper bit here.
Do it again!
And this was an absolutely classic Bender line.
Kill all humans!
Can robots even get the virus?
What virus?
Also, did anyone else notice this little disenchantment Easter egg in New Orleans? When Hermes is in the voodoo shop, you can see a trog hanging from a rope from the ceiling. I really hope we continue to see little disenchantment nods in the show now that disenchantment itself is over. Speaking of which, if you're waiting on my part 5 review, it's probably coming tomorrow or the next day depending on how long it ends up being, followed by my yearly Futurama references and disenchantment video, so stay tuned for that final entry. Also, don't forget to check out my latest video breaking down all of the evidence for Futurama and Disenchantment's shared universe. We've got a lot of Futurama Disenchantment content right now. Before I go, I also want to once again shout out the writers and actors strikes. Please show your support for the creatives who make these shows possible. I'll be posting a link in the description for resources that can help support these striking workers. And I still want to hear what you think about the latest Futurama episode and the new season in general. Was their COVID episode everything you feared, or did it actually surprise you? Let me know below in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.